My name's Rebecca Fleming, and I'm I lecture in the Classics faculty here in Cambridge, and I'm one of the co-conveners of the conference Infertility and Sacred Space from Antiquity to the Early Modern. I'm also one of the principal investigators in the Generation to Reproduction project, which is a Wellcome-funded project based in the university that brings together researchers from a range of times and places with the very modest aim of trying to rewrite the whole history of how people have understood, tried to intervene around, thought about, acted about human reproduction, demographics, all of the issues around that from the beginning to now, roughly in the Western tradition, although we've got quite a generous understanding of Western tradition. And so I think you can see how this conference fits into that broader project. It's about trying to think about the options that people have had at different times and places in terms of trying to impact upon, promote their fertility in ways that they find more helpful and productive. In all sorts of ways, obviously, fertility and infertility are key issues today, affecting different parts of the world in different sorts of ways, and people think about them in different ways. But one of the kind of points at which we started to think about this conference was thinking about things like reproductive tourism today, very modern idea that people go abroad to particular clinics to have infertility treatments of various sorts. And the different models that people think about that in terms of kind of geopolitics, the kind of economics of it and so on. But one of the ideas that came to me, since I'm a classicist and look at things always from way back, is why don't we think about this as pilgrimage in some way? Okay, clinics are meant to be scientific spaces, but in all sorts of ways people are going there looking for something a bit like a miracle. It's just that we've taken the idea of miracle and put it into medical science as opposed to having it touch other kind of spheres. So this is thinking about the ways in which people have motivated by a very strong kind of impulse, which is about the need to have children, to have heirs, or the need to have sons and so on, and social pressures that exist in all sorts of societies and kind of personal pressures. That people have, one of the ways that people have addressed that is by turning to the divine in various different sorts of ways. And that often involves journeys to particular sorts of sites. It involves a particular set of actions, getting yourself in the right frame of mind, how you prepare for that. And it involves setting up some sort of direct interaction with the divine. So there's a sort of sense of continuity of action in those sorts of areas. On the other hand, and we can also see that there are different sort of stories, there's a whole host of narratives that are told about miracle births and different times and places, artefacts that are attached to certain contexts, sorts of artwork and so on that are produced across a wide range of cultures, times and places. So that on the one hand it looks like we've got a sort of continuity, or at least something that holds all of this together. On the other hand, there might well be some quite acute differences in terms of the kind of ideas that people are bringing to these sorts of interactions, the sorts of places, the kind of different social contexts that they're acting in. We often think, for example, looking from the ancient perspective, again, that we see, for example, ancient practices to do with incubation. You go to a particular shrine, you purify yourself, you put yourself into the right state, you go into a particular sacred space, you sleep, you have a dream in which you interact with the god in some way, and that will bring about the outcome you want. Some of those same spaces from the ancient world then and those same practices get taken up in Christian traditions. And you can do the same in a church in Constantinople or something like that. But is it the same? Are these the same sorts of ideas that are being brought into practice? And there are ways in which these traditions diversify and come together. For example, we're very enthusiastic about the idea that in this conference we have some of the usual suspects, as it were, but we also have people who are thinking about healing trips to the shrines of Muslim saints or holy men within the Hindu tradition, for example, as well, and thinking about the ways in which traditions interact on a kind of international scale and setting in those sorts of contexts. And there's a whole host of themes. We want to think about continuity and change, but there's a whole host of themes that we want to address. For example, do people, when you're thinking about going to a particular site, do you fit questions of fertility into a kind of wider medical range? Would you go to the same site, address the same gods, do the same kind of action for fertility as for a fever or for blindness? Or do you put issues of fertility and reproduction into a rather different kind of categorisation and think of it much more to do with the everyday world? Or is it a specifically gendered thing where you address yourself to particular female divinities who are much more concerned with reproduction and children and so on more broadly? Is it the women that are expected to front up in terms of these kind of activities? It's one of the things that comes out of modern ideas and modern discussions, which is that however you think of the process of conception and reproduction and however collective you understand it, and that clearly both the male partner and the female partner may be in some sense responsible for the reproductive failure, it's always in the woman's body that the kind of drama of infertility treatment is played out. How much do we see this happening in pre-modern contexts, and how much do we see a kind of family decision making, individuals or whatever it might be? So there are various different kind of themes that we want to see explored. There are some very interesting artifacts that we see produced at different times and places that have particular sorts of powers. Again, what are the kind of ideas that collect around those? And I suppose the kind of driving force behind all of this is that issues of infertility have become much more to the fore in public discourse of all sorts, ethical, social, economic. All of these kind of ideas are much more upfront with us in society today. And it always helps to think about these things within a kind of broader context, to think about the past ideas that have informed the present, to explore the different kind of thematics that come through in this. And we hope that this will be therefore both a contribution to, in a kind of quite flexible and open sort of way, a contribution to a kind of current discussion, as well as focusing on a crucial issue, which is, all societies have to reproduce themselves. This is a matter of real personal family kind of drama and concern, that continuity of the family is so important. This is something that people through the ages have invested enormous amounts of time and energy and kind of commitment to. How has that played out in past societies? What are the options for people to find assistance? What are the connections that are made, the networks in which these operate in? So it's both trying to understand the past better and this key kind of strand that runs through it, but also thinking about our present concerns as well.